where we chew on something for the taste buds
and the mind. We're back. Back. No, it's been a minute, longer than a minute, but we're here. We're back.
We're back.
Yes.
We wanted to refocus more of our channel on, I think, overall wellness, health.
Healing. And in order to do that, you actually have to do some healing and wellness and health. And it took a while for me, particularly. I've been sharing my health journey on the ground, but it's been for the last 4.5 months. But even before that, sort of prepping mentally. So yeah, that's where I've been.
I mean, she's also been doing fabulous. We'll go into a lot more in depth on her healing journey, but she's doing really, really incredible, making lifestyle changes that are going to be sustainable for her health. And I couldn't be happier.
Oh, thanks, sis.
It's true.
So, we're actually coming back with a really fun episode. We interviewed the brilliant Dr. Nancy Segal. She is the premier, let's say, expert on all things twins.
Yes.
And we may be a little biased, but I can tell you that you will find this information extremely interesting, even if you aren't a twin.
Yes. I was just about to say, yeah, we might be a little bit biased because we are twins, so we think twins are very interesting.
Yes.
I find myself very interesting. Just kidding. Everyone should find themselves interesting. But yeah, so we're super excited to share this interview with Dr. Nancy Segal. And just like,
a lot of fascinating facts.
yes.
Like yams. Might be helpful in having twins.
Yeah, ever heard of the vanishing twin syndrome?
Yeah, we share all those things in the interview coming up. We interviewed Dr. Nancy Segal over Zoom. So we're going to play that interview right after this. Yeah, got anything else to say?
I was. Well, I have a lot of things to say.
Yeah, keep it short.
No, I think everyone will really enjoy this interview. And I think one of the most important elements of this interview that I thought was really special was talking about the bond that twin sisters have, especially identical twin sisters tend to have. And
Yeah, the sisterhood.
yeah, the sisterhood. Yeah, so sit back and relax.
And here's some interesting facts.
TK always got to come in with a rhyme.
About twins.
Yes.
And we're really, really happy to be back and start doing these shows more frequently. So thank you so much to those who are following us and, joining in the fam. The Quan Sister fam.
Yeah.
You're part of the family.
You're our virtual family.
Yes, exactly. So we'll see you soon and enjoy this interview.
Bye.
Thank you for joining.
Chew on something.
Probably would need a full hour to list all your accomplishments or more, but we're going to do it with this short bio. So I'm going to read this. Dr. Nancy L. Segal is a psychology professor and director of the Twin Studies Center at California State University, Fullerton. She received her PhD degree in behavioral sciences at the University of Chicago. Dr. Segal specializes in twin research and teaches courses in developmental psychology. She has written 9 books on twins, most recently an annotated collection of photographs taken at the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz.
Titled The Twin Children of the Holocaust, Stolen Childhood and the Will to Survive, and the story of high-profile lawsuit involving denial of citizenship to one twins titled Gay Fathers, Twin Sons, the citizenship case that captured the world. Her work has been featured in the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly. She has appeared on national and international television, including the BBC, Today Show, and Good Morning America. Well, Dr. Segal.
Yeah.
We're so excited to have you join us today. So,
My pleasure.
Dr. Segal, you're a fraternal twin and wrote that you and your sister became closer as adults. In your research, are identical twins typically closer than fraternal twins?
Yeah, we find that from research and from day-to-day interactions with twins, that identical twins are on average closer socially than fraternal twins. Fraternal twins have a lot of variation. There are some that are quite close, some that are not so close. My sister and I were not so close growing up, but like many ordinary siblings, which is what we are genetically, we became much closer as adults. But yes, these average differences between twins are quite fascinating. And I'm writing a book now. I have a new book contract and just wrote the introductions today about,
Congratulations.
about, about what twin studies and twin relationships tell us about our relationships with everybody else. You know, who do we like? Who do we love? That sort of thing. I think twins have a lot to show us.
Well, I definitely can be a testament to the closeness of twins. If Brianna doesn't like someone or just isn't crazy about someone, I feel like automatically I'm not crazy about that person, and same vice versa. So I feel like, as having this sibling bond, I think our taste and generally our relationships with other people are the same, even though we have different sets of friends as well. So what causes a fertilized egg to split is a mystery. You say there's a lot of reasons for fraternal twinning, but not the reasons known for identical twinning isn't as vast as fraternal twinning. You also say that fraternal twinning is a better barometer for shifting health and environmental conditions. So why is there so little known about identical twinning? And
it's a great question. Why we know so little about what causes the fertilized egg to divide, but we just don't know. It's fascinating that it does. It gives us a research model for looking at all kinds of behavioral and physical traits, but nevertheless, it's really a puzzle. Now we know a lot more about what causes fraternal twinning. We know that older age is linked to a woman having a higher chance of releasing two eggs at the same time. And if you think about it, it's kind of a reproductive mistake because the human womb is designed ideally for one baby. And so to manage two or more is really not ideal. But nevertheless, it could be a last-ditch effort to get your genes out in the population at a somewhat older age. Your body does a kind of cost-benefit analysis because older mothers also have a higher chance of having a genetically defective baby, particularly Down syndrome. So we also know that mothers who are taller and heavier tend to have a higher chance of fraternal twins. And there's a genetic effect with it also, although we don't know exactly how those genes get transmitted in families. It's hard to predict who will have a fraternal twin. We know that seasonality can play a role. So there's many, many things that affect fraternal twinning. But with identical twinning, boy, if we could crack that one, I'd be one happy research scientist.
You say taller and heavier women tend to have fraternal twinning. I wonder if shorter women tend to have identical twinning because our mom is short. Well, she said she wasn't that short, but she's on the shorter side.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's the case. I don't know what the height variation is among, say, mothers of singletons versus mothers of identical twins. That would be an interesting thing to know. But we do know that mothers of fraternals do tend to be taller. And the fact that they're older, and they have previous children. See, having previous children also is an increased factor, but it's confounded with older mothers because older mothers have more time to have previous children. So we don't really know exactly what the effect is, but I think it's more of an older mother effect. And of course, with in vitro fertilization and other reproductive technologies being so readily available these days, there's been a dramatic rise in fraternal twinning because there's typically an implantation of more than one embryo. But nevertheless, what's fascinating is that IVF has also led to an increase, albeit not as dramatic, in identical twinning because you're micro-manipulating the zygote or the fertilized egg, and that sometimes can hasten some kind of division of the embryo.
Oh, wow. And just to jump into that, what you were saying, do you know specifically what are the sort of shifting health and environmental conditions that can be revealed through the decrease or increase of fraternal twinning?
Well, with fraternal twinning, as I said, there's a higher chance of an older mother having a genetically defective child, Down syndrome in particular. There is some mixed findings that mothers of twins, who, when they deliver, have increased resistance to breast cancer because they have higher levels of circulating hormones. But that effect seems to disappear if they have a single child afterwards. So that's when you have twins. There's also some mixed literature that women from fraternal same-sex pairs tend to have a higher risk of breast cancer. But again, that's kind of a mixed finding. You know, one thing I should point out is that research has been done to see to what extent twin research findings generalized to the non-twin public, because that's one of the main reasons for doing it. And pretty much, you know, twins are ordinary people. There's just a couple of things that don't apply, but really past the age of 6, any research finding that you see from an identical and fraternal twin study will apply to the general population. But we do know that twin infants tend to have sort of higher rates of congenital anomalies because twinning is, you know, a high-risk pregnancy. There can be fetal crowding, sharing of blood circulation in identical twins. And so there can be a higher occurrences of congenital or at birth problems for identical and fraternal twins, mostly identical.
There's a saying that says twins run in the family is a myth, since you mentioned there is little evidence that the tendency to produce twins is tied to genes. Although you included a study that found an excess of identical twins born to mothers who were identical twins, do identical twins have a higher chance of having identical twins?
Now, that's another great question. For many years, they thought that only fraternal twinning ran in families, although they didn't know exactly who would be likely to have it. It's not like eye color where you can sort of figure out who might have blue and brown. But with identical twinning, they have found these families, as you say, where there seems to be a lot of identical twinning. And so the thinking now is that identical twinning may have a genetic component in some families. It may be kind of a random occurrence in some, but it may be genetically influenced in some families. And if you look at certain pockets of people or communities around the world, there's one in Iran and there's one in India, where there's very high concentrations of identical twinning, also in the south of Brazil. And so there may be this gene that's passed down or set of genes that does lead to identical twinning.
Oh, wow. Which leads us to our next question. And I think that there might be some correlation maybe with food, because, you know, we read your book and your book is called Entwined Lies, Twins and What They Tell Us About Human Nature. And it's, like I said in the beginning, it's truly captivating. There was one revelation where you spoke about the highest rates for twinning can be found in Nigeria. 1 out of 11 births are fraternal twinning, and well, twinning, but according to the study, 95% are fraternal twinning. And a theory is that it may be yams because it has an estrogen-like substance. But some studies challenge that theory. Is there another theory to that phenomenon?
Yeah, they pretty much think that Nigeria, and also, in fact, now the highest twinning rate is in Benin. So they're kind of having a race about this. But they think that it's women's hormone levels that give rise to multiple ovulation. Now, the fact that they eat these yams, it's the white yam in particular that has been linked to having fraternal twins. But it's not like if the Western populations went out and ate these yams, you're going to have fraternal twins. I think you'd be disappointed.
See women who want twins stuffing their mouths with yams.
Yeah, exactly. But rather than IVF. But my understanding is that even the women who have moved away from the yam eating communities and moved more to the cities still have this higher tendency towards twinning. That's my understanding. You know, things may have changed by now, but that's my understanding.
I mean, I do remember, even though we're identical twins, our mother and grandmother ate so many yams. I don't know. I think every dinner we had a yam. So
maybe that's the reason why we're here, sis.
Well, you surprised them by being identical then.
yes. So methods that create artificially conceived pairs or multiples, in your research, has there been any distinctions in comparison to natural conception?
Yeah, see, again, the research is mixed on this. Some studies find no difference, and some studies do find higher rates of physical difficulties in twins who were conceived through IVF. But, you know, I'll say that now there are fewer twins being born through IVF. And the reason I say that is because now physicians are becoming much more skillful at implanting only a single embryo, which is what they prefer to do, because then they avoid the high-risk pregnancy. that is part of being a twin. So I think that at this point, we're going to start to see a reduction in children conceived through IVF. But to answer your question more directly, with twins, the research is kind of mixed. I think it's more on the lines of, yes, there could be some problems. One of my friends has a pair of twins conceived through IVF, and she claims that in her community, where a lot of the mothers who were older and put off childbearing for a long time and conceived through IVF had twins, and there was a higher rate of autism among them. But I have not seen that documented. So I just throw that out as an observation, but I've not seen it scientifically documented.
So, see, Brianna and I, we were born premature. Why are twins often born prematurely?
Why? Because the mother runs out of space. There's only enough space for a certain amount of time. And, actually, twins do tend to be born prematurely, both identical and fraternal. I was born prematurely as well. And, most twins do okay, as long as it's not, tremendously early. But, what's interesting is that if twins are born and they're developmentally consistent with the gestational period. So, for example, if you're delivered at 8 months, let's say, but you are consistent with what a baby should look like at 8 months, then that's fine. It's worse to be in that womb for 9 months and to be developmentally delayed, to be smaller than you should be for 9 months.
And that's only applicable to twins.
Yeah. Now there's an interesting situation that's happened to some mothers delivering twins, and that is that one child is born before the other, and the largest interval is 90 days. That was a case that I found, and I got into the Guinness World Records book.
90 days.
Yeah, one child was just ready to be born, the other one wasn't. And so they were, I think they were identical twins, but you could see that how they were developmentally discrepant at birth, and it would take the earlier one some time to catch up to her sister.
The other sibling was like, stay in there. There's nothing out here for you. Stay in there as long as you can.
Yeah. There have been twins born before that. There was a pair born 87 days apart. So the 90 actually took more of that. There are very interesting situations that twins pose that we can't even think about until they happen.
Oh my gosh. I thought because we're 15 minutes apart. So I thought that was a long time. Wait till I tell our mother. 87 days.
It's not all that much. 15 minutes. I mean, I was 7. 15 minutes is not all that much. And, with IVF, with cesarean deliveries, sometimes babies are born just a minute apart because they're taken out almost at the same time. And, I think that mothers and maybe twins put much too much into the meaning of birth order. A birth order really doesn't mean a whole lot, except that when there's a vaginal delivery, the firstborn is better off than the secondborn because of the way the uterus functions. So the secondborn is always a little bit in a little riskier situation. Not to say that something's going to happen. It's just that in general, it's a riskier situation physically.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you a question in regarding to the twin, if it's a natural birth or vaginal birth.
Yeah.
So there's a theory that an older twin, if it's a natural vaginal birth, the older twin has a longer face and is slightly taller because they've stretched through the vaginal canal first, and the second child or the twin that comes after has the rounder face because there's more room for through. Is that true?
Yeah, that was actually something that I was reading. I told my sister about because I have a longer face and I'm slightly taller, just a little bit.
I've heard sometimes from families just anecdotally that one twin has a somewhat slimmer face and one twin has a rounder one. I've never heard it linked to birth order, but I could see where that might be possible. I would think, though, that after birth, it would sort of bounce back, that you'd sort of, once the environmental insult, I'll call it that, has occurred, then you'd sort of bounce back to your sort of natural formation. Maybe not. I mean, I don't know. It's not always the case that the bigger twin is born first, though. I mean, I've seen cases where bigger twins are born second.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in fraternal pairs, that can happen, absolutely. And identical twins, it can happen as well.
Well, I'm here to say I didn't bounce back, Dr. Segal. I just kept this round face and I'm slightly shorter, so I did not bounce back.
I think I think there were other explanations for that, though. I think that maybe there was some mutual circulation there. You got a little bit less nutrition. I mean, there's lots of reasons why that could happen. Identical twins differ on average in height by 2 inches. That's not, unexpected by any means. And in fact, what's fascinating is that identical twins are less alike at birth in weight than our fraternal twins because of the hazards of the prenatal situation.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But then once they're born, they tend to converge on the similar size, and fraternals become less alike.
Okay. So the vanishing twin syndrome, when one fetus is reabsorbed by another, proves that the rate is much higher than 1 out of 80 births. As many start out as twins and parents of twins than we know. How common is the syndrome?
That's a great question also. We don't have a really good handle on that. I've seen centers that report 0% up to maybe 70 or 80%. So we really don't know, because I'm sure a lot of these cases are not detected or are underreported. But it is probably the case that more twins are conceived than are actually born. But of course, that could come from a lot of reasons. It could come from the vanishing twin syndrome. It could come from mothers spontaneously aborting. It could come from a lot of different sources. Sometimes these vanishing twins are discovered later in life. When a person has, say, a tumor or something is detected, and it becomes sort of this mass of cells that might have been a twin, and the mother can also resorb the fetus. It's not just the twin, but the mother can as well.
Oh, wow.
Thank God mom didn't absorb me, or you didn't absorb me, sis. There are disturbing findings that child abuse is elevated with families that have twins. Do you have any research on this that you can elaborate on these findings?
Yeah. I don't conduct that research myself, but I certainly am familiar with it, and I've written quite a bit about it. And yes, there does seem to be a tendency for twins to have higher abuse rates as children than non-twins. And what are the reasons for it? There seems to fall into two different sets of explanation. One is that families may not be equipped to handle twins. So you may be going from 1 child to 3, or no children to 2, or 2 to 4. So it's overwhelming. And so if parents do not have the resources, or they don't have the help involved, or whatever, there may be a tendency for those families, as long as, it's not all families. Some families don't have the resources and they're just wonderful parents. But some parents who may be short-tempered and hard to contain their emotions could inflict abuse on both twins. Now, there's another explanation that sometimes one twin is favored over the other. If one twin is perceived by the parents as more pleasant or more attractive or more healthy, it could be the other twin who is abused. And it's more often the case that one is abused rather than both.
So our next question, some parafraternal twins can look identical, while some identical pairs do not. The appearance of how identical a pair may be is not indicative of being an identical twin. How are twins genetically defined to be considered identical?
So an identical twin it's actually a very bad name, identical. We should say monozygotic, because monozygotic means one zygote or one fertilized egg. Now, having said that, everybody says identical. And you're right, some identical twins or monozygotic twins do not look exactly the same. And that can be due to prenatal influences, as I said, fetal crowding or mutual blood circulation. In fact, I studied a pair of twins who differed by 4 inches at the age of 7 and differed by 7 inches when they got to be adults. But they were genetically identical as shown by their DNA test. And the reason was that one child had a marginally attached placenta, so did not get the nutrition that her sister had received. So they looked extremely different, although they had the same face. It's just that one was a very small version of the other one. And I recently studied some twins in Wales who looked quite different. They had a height difference of about 2 or 3 inches, and they had a fairly sizable weight difference. But those were environmental effects. Genetically,
In Wales?
they were DNA in Wales. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible that you can take your twin research and it's applicable to,
Well,
whale's a mammal, I suppose. But, yeah.
No. Not the mammal, the country Wales.
I thought Wales. I was like, this is so fascinating. The country wheels are.
That
Well,
is
sis, I was thinking the same thing. So there was our twin mind going.
I get, I guess, I get so. I don't know what the twinning rate is in Wales, although I did do a chapter in Entwined Lives, as you know, on non-human twinning, and it's fascinating material. I should really update that chapter.
Yeah, so it wasn't a stretch that I thought you meant Wales.
All right.
In rare circumstances, identical twins show reversal of internal lungs. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce it right. Situs inversus. Is that a Greek?
Citizen versus. It's probably
Okay.
Latin. Yeah.
Oh, parts on the opposite sides of the body. What is one of the rarest circumstances you've seen or heard about?
I actually had a pair of twins in my lab with citizen versus, and they looked identical. They were the same, but one had completely reversed internal organs, and she was left-handed and her sister was right-handed. And but other than that, it didn't affect her health at all. I mean, she was just fine, but it was a very interesting case. And they used to think that that kind of reversal, about 25% of identicals show some form of reversal or asymmetry, like handedness or dental patterns, or one has a birthmark on the left, one on the right, things of that sort. But they used to think that it came from delayed splitting. So we know that identical twins result when the fertilized egg divides between fertilization and the 14th post-conceptional day. But now the thinking is just that the way the cells kind of organize themselves is responsible for these kinds of asymmetries. That's another fascinating area that we really haven't fully pinned down yet.
But are these cases more on the rare side?
Are they more on the what?
Occur commonly, do they?
Oh, well, as I said, 25% of identicals show some form of this, but citizen versus is much less frequent. And it also is not more particular to twins than it is for non-twins.
Fraternal twins can be same sex or opposite sex, but you mentioned that there are extremely rare cases of identical twins with different sexes, such as the case of the Italian identical triplets, where two are male and one is female. Can you elaborate how this is possible?
Yeah. So what happened there was that identical triplet males were conceived, but in the very early course of cell replication, one of those fetuses lost, probably not a fetus and probably still an embryo, one of those embryos lost the Y chromosome. See, what defines males as an X and a Y, females are two X's. So what happened there was that one of the males lost the Y chromosome. And so that female was an XO, which defines a Turner syndrome female. So outwardly, they look female. They don't have functioning sex organs, but they have very, very feminine identities. And most of them will marry and they'll adopt children. But you can see them in the general population. I mean, well, let me put it this way. They're in the general population. You probably wouldn't spot one. They're difficult to see.
So when we were in school, we were intentionally placed in different classes. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sitting in front of a chandelier, so the sun's coming, so I look spotty. Anyway, we were placed in separate classes, and I'm still a bit miffed about that, but you talked about psychologists, I guess school administration thought it would be best to separate twins for individuality and for separate identities. But you also spoke about, I believe it was a 1993 resolution in Oklahoma that said they want
Oklahoma, yeah.
that wanted school districts to do this by case scenario. They basically did not want it to be a widespread mandate for all school districts to follow. Do you think this policy was helpful or harmful?
Well, I think the policy of routinely separating twins is not acceptable. We don't have a single policy for how we place single children. We do it on a case-by-case basis, and I think twins should be treated exactly the same. I favor case-by-case basis with a cooperative relationship between the school and the parent. I think that it's unfair to expect twins to separate from each other as well as the home, as well as the parent. I mean, that's a lot to handle if you're a young child, and it's a very unfamiliar situation. So this idea of not having an identity is completely ridiculous. In fact, you know, when I first started on this, I read a New York Times article where a school principal in Ohio was quoted as saying that research shows that twins are better off apart. So I called him and I said, "What research is this?" And he said, "Oh, well, not really research, just our observations in our school." And I thought, people are going to base their policies on this. This is completely irresponsible. So what I tell teachers to do for identical twins, particularly, is to put them, and even fraternals, put them at separate tables in the same room. So that way they can mix with other children, but still see each other. And that's what's important. And if they're identical, I think they should have different colored clothing, a name tag, a different hairstyle, something, because you don't want people just calling them twin. You want them to be called by their name. And it may be that they both look good in long hair or short hair or whatever, that I want to cut their hair, fine. But then have a little name tag on them. Something like that, just so people know their name. That's so important.
Where were you when we were in grade school? I did not want to be separated.
I know. I mean, honestly, I couldn't agree more. I've always felt we've had very individual kind of personalities and identities, and to have, I don't know how many times we've heard people just call us twins. For us, that's very annoying, because even though she is my identical twin sister, we're still very much two people. And I was still a bit traumatized by being separated in grade school. I definitely didn't feel like it was necessary at all.
It's not necessary. And that's why I'm so against educators doing this on a routine basis. And, I've actually gone to court to testify in a case where parents wanted their male-female twins together and the school would not allow it. So I had to come in and testify based on my research and the research of my colleagues as to why putting them together might be beneficial in their case and certainly not harmful. You take it year to year. When the twins are ready to separate, if they're ready ever, that's fine. The main thing is, are they happy? Are twins happy? Are they doing well? Do they have friends? Are they performing well in school? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then you don't fix a system that is not broken. You're just asking for trouble. Now, one thing parents and educators have to be aware of, and maybe the two of you can relate to this, is that twins and even some near in age children will form special private words and expressions and gestures that they communicate with to each other, and other people don't understand it. And that can delay speech development. So what I tell parents is it's important to have twins individually exposed to each parent. So, husband take one out one day and mother take one out another day, or at least, give the children some exposure to an adult model. A lot of times parents decide that, well, twins are happy with each other, so let's leave them alone. And that's true to some degree, but you don't want them together alone all the time. They need some exposure to adult models.
I think that we can relate to a secret language. Now, we didn't have a secret language, but we spoke very softly. So, someone could be within earshot and we could be speaking. And this is something we can still do as adults, and no one can hear us. And we've heard this often, what are you guys talking about? You're talking so slow, we can't hear you. That's the whole point. But that's something that we've done since children. So I guess that's our sign of a secret language.
Yeah. Well, actually, to call it a secret language is a little bit of a misnomer, although people use that term all the time. But it's really just a series of private words, private gestures, private expressions, even facial communications. I've seen that. And sometimes twins use things only within the twinship. Sometimes they use them with other people, even if the other people don't understand. But what fascinated me is that in some families, the older siblings understand what the twins are doing, what they're talking about, and they serve as translators to the parents. I find that fascinating.
I do find that when my sister and I are together, we do tend to talk and say the exact same thing at the exact same time. And I've always noticed that when we're together, that's when that happens. So.
It's not unsurprising. I mean, it's not surprising. The reason is that, if you're identical, you tend to process the world the same way. You tend to react to things the same way. So you're going to have similar thoughts. And you're going to say the same thing at the same time. That doesn't surprise me at all. I've seen this many times in my research when I'll be testing twins individually, and I'll ask them, how did you like the test? And they describe it in exactly the same way. So yeah, that's all very consistent with being a genetically identical twin.
So fraternal twins, even if raised together, are much less alike than identical twins reared apart. This is a testament to the power of genes. You specify that one of the most fascinating case studies of twins reared apart is of Jim Springer and Jim Lewis. The pair of reared apart twins that launched the Minnesota study of twins reared apart, which you worked on. Can you share some of the details of your most fascinating cases of twins reared apart, such as the similarities they shared?
Yeah. Well, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer were certainly way up there in terms of their similarities. They were raised apart in different Ohio cities until they were 39. And they had some amazing similarities, such as mixed headache syndromes that developed when they were teenagers. They both bit their nails excessively. They both liked woodworking. They both had blue Chevrolets, and they both liked to vacation in the same 3-block strip of beach in Florida. It's amazing they never met each other there over the years. But they were very, very similar. The only difference was that one wore his hair down on his bangs and one slicked his hair back. And I could never remember which Jim did which. So they were a little odd that way. But I think my most fascinating case of twins raised apart was Jack and Oscar. And I think I mentioned them in the book. Jack and Oscar were born in Trinidad to a father from Romania who was escaping persecution of Jewish people. And the mother was a German citizen who was looking for a better life. So they were born in 1933. And when the marriage went sour, the father kept Jack and raised him Jewish in Trinidad, and the mother took Oscar and an older sister back with her to Germany. And in Germany, Oscar was in the Hitler Youth, as all the twin boys were. But he was 12 when the war ended. So I know some headlines called him a Nazi, which he never was a Nazi. But at any rate, the twins knew of each other, of course, because the mother knew that she'd had twins, and the father knew that Jack was a twin. So they met very briefly in their 20s, and they didn't get along at all. It was a very cold meeting. They just did not get along. But then when they were in their 40s, they heard about the Minnesota Twins study. And by then they were more mature, interested in learning about themselves. And they came, and they had a very interesting love-hate relationship. And they were very similar in their personalities and their habits and just so many things. And one of the most interesting things I learned about them was a conversation that Jack told me about, where they had very different political and historical understandings, of course, one being raised Jewish, one being raised in Nazi Germany. And Jack said that they knew that if their positions had been reversed, then they each would have adopted the life philosophy of the other one, which was a set of beliefs they did not care for at all. And that's a very interesting thing. They both became very fervent in their beliefs. Jack mostly in Trinidad because he didn't want people to know his German roots, and Oscar in Germany because he didn't want people to know his Jewish roots. So they handled their situation in similar ways by becoming very patriotic. But the content of that patriotism was a function of where they lived. So if they'd been reversed, Jack probably would have, endorsed Germany as the philosophies of Germany and Jack and Oscar as Trinidad.
So very much products of their environment, and it was also insightful for him to realize that if the roles had been reversed, then he would have possessed sort of the same ideals as well.
Yeah. What's interesting is that it's only identical twins raised apart who are able to see themselves in a life not lived. So, we can all imagine what's it like if we gone to a different school, taken a different job, grown up someplace else, married somebody else. We can imagine. But identical twins can actually see themselves in a life not lived. And that's a really interesting mirror that they can reflect upon.
No, that's really interesting that you said that because, as we mentioned, we came from a abusive childhood. So, we're just going to mention that later, but that was one of the reasons why I also think that I was able to survive that amount of immense abuse every day for over 10 years, because I saw my sister surviving. And even though I didn't correlate it then, I see it now because she was literally like a mirror image of me. And I felt like if she could get through the day, then so could I. It was just I mean, I didn't realize that until I was an adult, but I very much felt that was the case when we were children.